Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the February author series. We are pleased to welcome Meg Hirshberg, author of For Better or For Work, a survival guide for entrepreneurs and their families. Meg worked in her husband Gary's business, Stonyfield Yogurt, for the first several years of their marriage. Stonyfield took 9 painful years to reach profitability and now is worth about $370 million in sales. It's the largest organic yogurt company in the world. Meg's work has appeared in Yankee, New Hampshire Magazine, as well as the Boston Globe Magazine, among others. Meg is also a contributing editor and columnist for Inc. magazine. Her column appears every other week and is called Balancing Acts. Finally, by way of introduction, I'd also like to mention that Meg is a new contributor to the Kauffman Founders School video series, and her videos launch actually today, and so you'll be able to see that as well at Kauffman Founders School. So Meg, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for that nice introduction, and thank you all for attending, everyone out there taking time out of a busy morning to attend the seminar. As Michelle said, my work is writing, but my daily life for the past 30 years has been as the spouse of an entrepreneur. My husband, Gary Hirshberg, as Michelle mentioned, is the co-founder and chairman of Stonyfield Yogurt, but he was the company's CEO for about 28 years. I have been a freelance writer for about 15 years, and for 5 years, just concluded in September, I contributed a column called Balancing Acts to the print magazine, to Inc.'s print version, and now I just started a column on Inc.com of the same title. And the issues that I look at are really sort of work-life balance issues that are really particular to an entrepreneurial setting. I have very much lived most of the topics that I write about in the column and also in my book, For Better or For Work, which is what you see on your screen right now. I wrote the book that I wish Gary and I had had all along. I think we could have avoided a lot of headaches and heartaches along the way if we had had a resource like this, because in a way, no matter what your revenues are or what your company does, most entrepreneurs experience similar personal challenges when they try to successfully build a business and a family at the same time. Typical challenges can include the spouse's doubts about the business, concerns about the time and resources it requires from the entrepreneur's guilt surrounding limited time spent with his or her children, the spouse's resentment about assuming an outsized share of the parenting role, the queasy necessity of raising money from friends and family, and the responsibility felt for that money by both the spouse and the entrepreneur, which was actually a very big factor for Gary and me. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Establishing boundaries when the family home also houses the business or a home office. The struggles of couples that work together. Then we have the spouse's freak out when the entrepreneur wants to launch a second or third or a ninth business. I always say that my least favorite words from Gary were, "I have an idea," when he'd come home and say, "I have an idea," and the earth beneath me would shake. Consequences for the business when serious illness strikes the family. The relentless intrusion of technology. And the reality that a business can stress a family to the breaking point. It's a wonder that no company has been cited as co-defendant in a divorce case. The strategies and solutions in my book represent the distilled wisdom not only from my own experience, but from the several hundred entrepreneurs and spouses that I interviewed for the book and for my columns. So for the next little bit, I'm going to share my story about the challenges Gary and I faced personally during our difficult startup years, and some of what we've learned, again, from my own experience and from my interviewees, about coping with the dilemmas that typically face entrepreneurial families. And then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So before we look at the past, I'd like to just have you look at our present. This is our factory now in Londonderry, New Hampshire. As Michelle mentioned, we have about $370 million in revenues, and Stonyfield is now the 4th largest yogurt company in America and the largest manufacturer of organic yogurt in the world. But it wasn't always like this. When a business is hugely successful, people assume that success came easily, inevitably, and overnight. There is a romance that attaches to successful businesses, and it seems to me they always involve, or they often involve garages. You know, Ben and Jerry's scooping ice cream in a gas station, Steve Jobs and Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard all starting their fledgling business in their garage. And I'm not sure why that is, but maybe it's because garages are where spouses usually are not. It took us 9 years to create this so-called overnight success, 9 years of losses before we had a profitable year, and we almost didn't make it. What the size and growth trajectory of your company, I'll wager that those of you listening have had and maybe continue to have your own equivalent of the dark nights of the soul that Gary and I lived through. So if you're struggling with some of these challenges, after my talk, you'll have the comfort of knowing that you're not alone, and you'll almost certainly have the satisfaction of feeling better about the state of your own company, or for that matter, your personal life, in comparison to how dire our situation was for our first decade in business. It would actually be hard to be worse off than we were back then. So welcome to our story. It all started innocently enough. I met Gary at an organic farming conference in 1984. I loved his product. I was, sort of romanced by him and the business at the same time. I loved helping sell the product, and it was all really a lot of fun before it became real. It became real a couple of years later when Gary and I decided to get married, and I moved up to live with him at Stonyfield Farm in Wilton, New Hampshire, which you see the farmhouse pictured here. This farmhouse, well, as I'll show you in a minute, it housed, we lived in just a tiny little portion of it. The rest of it was for the business and our partners and the yogurt works, and so there's a lot crammed in there. One icy January day, we moved my things into this dirty, spooky, freezing, dilapidated, wood-heated 19th century farmhouse. And it was my move to Stonyfield that made me realize I hadn't just married a man, I had married a business as well. We shared the farmhouse with our partners, Samuel and Louisa Kamen. We also shared business, and I put this map up here of our buildings because just to show you how close everything was. We were all thrown in together. We were all on top of each other. And for those of you listening who have started your companies in your home, I think you'll understand that, and relate to the fact that there's nothing like having a business for a housemate for amping up stress in the family. This is our first truck. The large old barn was originally, that you see in the back, was originally for the cows. And then we used it to store the cups and lids. To make yogurt on any scale, you really need a sterile environment, and this was anything but that. So we lost a ton of product to contamination. We ended up feeding all the pigs in southern New Hampshire with our spoiled product. Unfortunately, they were not paying customers. This was our early production. You can see everything was by hand. We didn't even have hair nets. Everyone's wearing their little bandanas. And then eventually, we did get a very, very used machine that was always breaking. We did graduate to hair nets there, but you can still see much of this was done by hand. When I moved up to Stonyfield, I went to work in sales and later as a yogurt maker. Being a yogurt maker was actually quite a very stressful job. Our process was not sophisticated at all. For example, when I asked Samuel, our yogurt meister and partner, how I would know that the yogurt was done, he responded in his Brooklyn accent. He said, "You turn the cup on its side, and if the yogurt falls like the white cliffs of Dover, it's done." So it was on this kind of precision that our business was built. The next slide that got played out many times. This is Gary digging out the milk truck. We lived up a mile-long dirt road, which was either in New Hampshire, it was either icy or muddy, practically 12 months of the year. And many of our suppliers actually refused to come up that road when they got wise to it. but the poor milk guy had no choice. There was no other way to offload the milk. He got stuck, which always happened, and we couldn't dig him out. We'd have to call the tow truck. And this, to me, really, I put the slide in there because it really, to me, symbolizes those first 9 years of our business when we spent most of our time digging ourselves out of holes like this one, both literal and financial. Somehow, in spite of the madness which surrounded us and the fact that we were always on the edge of bankruptcy, we decided this was a grand time to have a family, and I don't know what we were thinking. Maybe we just needed more people to dig out trucks. I don't know what was going through our minds. But anyway, 2 of our 3 children were actually born at the farmhouse, which leads me to the only good thing, really, about living at the farm, which is that when the babies screamed, we found that if we walked them by the refrigeration compressors, they would stun them into silence. So, and actually, Gary, this was such a successful strategy that he taped the refrigeration compressors, and we would play the tape inside of our little apartment. He was thinking, he came in one day and said, I have an idea. We should market this tape. It might be our only successful product. Eventually, we did move to a real house with a thermostat, and which was a big thing for me. And including this this slide because it includes a shot of my mother. And the reason I wanted to mention her is she became, to my horror, our largest outside investor, which I will touch a little bit more on that later. So this shows the company's spectacular growth curve over the years, really until the recent recession, which started to level off. Those early years that I'm talking about, 83 to 90, they don't even show up on this chart. But once we moved into that factory that I showed you a slide of earlier, and our production became, really efficient, we started to make money, and we were really there. We were very well positioned with a wholesome organic product, just as people really started demanding it in the marketplace. This is personal growth curve. This is our family a couple of years ago outside our home in New Hampshire. Again, back to the farm here. But I just wanted to pause for a minute and just say, looking back now, it's easy for us and for company literature to romanticize that era, what I call the bad old days, as the time when we had, quote, 7 cows in a dream. I think that's what is on the website. Because it is, after all, the American dream to have a vision, to work hard, bring it to life, and have that dream come true, something that many of you listeners are doing or are trying to do right now. But to pause for just a minute and look a little more closely at the reality of that dream. Our company, Stonyfield, survived and went on to thrive because Samuel and Gary were persistent and determined and picked themselves up every day to do the entire scary and depressing thing they'd done yesterday all over again. As Gary said, in the early years, we had a great business, just no supply and no demand. So romantic it was not. Those early years put a lot of strain on individuals and on our marriage. Our life at the farm was chaotic and more than a little pathetic. We had a revolving door of employees, no privacy since we lived with the business. I was always freezing. The house was completely dilapidated. It really wasn't, I often say it wasn't trial by fire, it was trial by freezing. Even the spring farm was really difficult because outside our bedroom window was the yogurt factory leach field. And when the soil started to warm, the stench of the fermenting yogurt curds and whey was so strong that it would just almost knock me out in the bedroom. And when I was 9 months pregnant, and the partner, Samuel, who was in charge of the plant, to do something about it, because I just didn't want to deliver a baby and have this be the poor baby's first inhale. So Samuel gave Gary and me flexible pipe to redirect the effluent further away. We spent a full day laying pipe in a field, and I wound up giving birth a couple of days later with just completely covered in poison ivy. So the whole thing was just, personally was something of a disaster. And on the business front, things were no better. In fact, they were worse. Creditors were screaming. Shareholders were suing. Supermarket buyers were treating our low-volume brand as nothing more than a hassle. It was truly full catastrophe living. But as Lily Tomlin once said, things got a lot worse before they got worse. One of my goals in telling you these stories is to make, as I said earlier, is to make you feel better by comparison. So I hope that that's the case right now. During one fiscal year early on, 1987, we burned through between $10,000 and $25,000 in cash each week. Now, we ended up losing about $500,000 on sales of $2.3 million. Our cost of goods was too high and our production was too inefficient. Profitability always got pushed to another quarter, always another quarter. Gary spent half his time trying to raise money. We certainly weren't bankable. We wound up with about 300 shareholders. You might reason what crazy people would invest in this failing enterprise. Gary's only alternative was to raise money from friends and family, principally my mother. Many entrepreneurs turn to friends and family for startup money. As a matter of fact, it's the greatest source of startup money for entrepreneurs in America. Friends and family are the low-hanging fruit, but they also come with the most baggage, because risking the money of loved ones on such a dubious venture as ours, in our case, it really added a constant gnawing stress to our lives. It's literally true that when Gary would call my mother for another loan or investment, usually he'd call on a Wednesday to meet Thursday payroll, I would call her on the other line and beg her to say no, because it was money she couldn't afford to lose. I was worried about her retirement, about Gary's and my relationship with my brothers. Would they blame us if we lost everything and jeopardized my mother's financial security? I tell her, Mom, it's good money after bad. The more yogurt we make, the more money we lose. But she believed in the product, and even more, she believed. As much of a strain as it was to have friends and family in so deeply, I do think that Gary's fear of losing that money made him determined to keep the business alive. Frankly, there were times I wanted to go bankrupt or somehow lose the business, anything to be put out of our misery. After a few years of this, I wanted to raise the white flag and just say enough. I grew to hate the business and the stress, the fact that we were always an inch away from losing everything. The financial that Gary took were way beyond my comfort level. The deeper in we got, the more I was convinced that both he and my mother were nuts. Recently I read a great quote that confidence is what you have before you understand the problem. In my mind, Gary and my mother just didn't understand the problem. In 25 years of being around entrepreneurs and their families, I think this is typically the case with couples. That one person, i.e. the entrepreneur, is more comfortable with risk than their mate. I'm jealous of my friends with regular paychecks and reliable income. Many of them were starting to buy homes and have mortgages. I pined for the time when we could actually get a mortgage, and more importantly, as I mentioned, thermostats. Gary often quotes Winston Churchill's line that success is the ability to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. By this measure, he was a success and I was not. Starting over to me seemed very appealing. Most entrepreneurs launch their businesses aware that they are taking a financial risk, but they always seem to underestimate the personal risks they are taking in terms of stress on their marriage and family. This leads to the central message of my column and also my book, which is that entrepreneurial business is not a solo activity. It's never just about the entrepreneur. It's about the family too. The family is inevitably sucked up into its vortex. The entrepreneur's spouse is put in a delicate position. As the spouse, you feel that if you're not supportive of the business or how much time and money the entrepreneur devotes to it, then you're not being supportive of your mate. The business becomes personal because the entrepreneur's identity is so bound up with it. For Gary and me, I think we each made at least one big mistake when we were trying to build a family life while building a business at the same time. For his part, he didn't focus enough on carving out undistracted time with me on a regular basis. For my part, I think my biggest mistake was trying to build a big wall between the business and our family, between the business and me. But that becomes a road to separate lives. Ultimately, it's impossible to keep the spouse but divorce the business. People with 9-to-5 jobs build that wall by being at work during certain hours of the day and then being home and enjoying leisure for the rest of the time. But the term work-life balance just doesn't really apply to the entrepreneur. When you own a business, it's just one big, messy life. The enormous pressures of company building require that the spouse and the entrepreneur each understand at least one key thing. The spouse needs to understand that business requires the entrepreneur to be all in and should not try to take the entrepreneur's absences and tendency to workaholism personally. The entrepreneur needs to understand that what for her is a series of sprints in her business, landing that big account, securing that big loan, hiring that salesperson, is usually a long, lonely marathon for the spouse. But being in business can be enriching to the entrepreneur, the spouse, and the family, and not just financially. In our case, it's certainly been exciting, never boring. We've met fascinating people and traveled a lot because of the business. We feel great pride in our product and in our company. Our kids have learned about business issues, and we've involved them in it. They've gotten to see their parents in a leadership role. And for all of them, it was a great first job. And finally, it ended up being very lucrative for our family. So ultimately, the goal is to maximize the ways that business can enrich your family and minimize the negatives. Or to put it more starkly for the entrepreneur, the challenge becomes, how do you keep your spouse from thinking of your business as the enemy, as the antagonist to either security or intimacy or both? So hopefully I depressed you, and I'll use this as a time to launch into some solutions and strategies that I have gained from just being associated with business for so long, and also from all my interviews with entrepreneurs. Set the bar low, but set it somewhere. You may not have time for that 2-week getaway, but make sure to cultivate small moments. That cup of coffee with your spouse, that unstructured hangout time with your children. These can be meaningful times, as long as you're not glancing at your smartphone at the same time. Which leads me to item 2, turn off the smartphone. Be disciplined in carving out tech-free time. Learn to distinguish between what is important and what is urgent. Turn the phone off, put it away during family dinner, for instance. And I emphasize put it away because its mere presence on the table, at the bedside, at the beach, alters your family's shared space. These devices have a kind of totemic power, you know, even if when they're turned off, if they're sitting there, everyone keeps staring at them. You certainly don't want to relate to your family in this way. Treat your spouse like your most important client. You win customers by offering not simple attention, but true attentiveness. As a business person, you are solicitous, observant, mindful, aware, eager to both anticipate and fulfill your client's needs. Remember that your spouse is your #1 life client and most important connection, so court her with a thoughtful gift, a just because hug, morning coffee in bed. Make it clear that you want to keep her business too. I know I suggested to set the bar low, but not when it comes to vacations. I think that time away for entrepreneurs is really essential. You don't need to go far or for long or spend a lot of money, but make economies elsewhere and take those trips. Gary and I always say that our vacations, we just live for them. I mean, we felt like we kind of hopped from vacation to vacation emotionally. They were really important especially during those difficult years. Decide what you're going to discuss. Especially with family, work and personal life tend to fuse completely. But even if you don't, be careful about how and when you talk about work. Be sensitive to your partner's limits. Don't sugarcoat, but understand that they may have a different risk profile than you. And be careful about when you have these discussions. Talking about a lost account or mentioning a payroll problem is not a good idea when brushing your teeth before bed, for example. After a couple of years of an endless stream of business crises, and being perched on the edge of bankruptcy, Gary and I decided that we would act like the three wise monkeys, that I would cover my eyes and ears to see and hear no evil, and he'd go along by covering his mouth. This was an emotional survival strategy for us, and it was the best option out of a series of bad ones. I don't actually recommend this path that Gary and I took. Even if the business is shaky, a given during the startup years, the couple should try to find aspects of it they can discuss, like future products, exciting new accounts, or positive customer responses, so that they can stay connected. Befriend other company building families. Company building can be for both the spouse and the entrepreneur. If you're feeling anxious and unsure about your business, other entrepreneurs can provide a safe haven. They will understand and they won't judge. Work together for a cause. Just because you're not business partners with your spouse doesn't mean you can't collaborate on a venture that matters to you both. So work in a soup kitchen together, bang nails for Habitat for Humanity, organize a fundraiser, launch a nonprofit. Identify opportunities for you personally or for the company to help in the community. I think that you and your spouse will then come to appreciate each other's talents and therefore each other in new ways. This is also a great way to engage the kids in a project that is meaningful to your whole family. Visit your family's universe. Talk to your spouse about the things that make up his day. Better yet, join him at a conference, read one of his students' papers, play audience while he rehearses a presentation. You will understand each other better. Likewise with your children. Most parents certainly try to attend their children's events. But parenting is not just about attending recitals and soccer games. Try hanging out with them, watching a stupid movie together, spontaneously shooting hoops. Try to spend unscheduled time with your kids as well, so they don't feel like just a recurring item on your Google Calendar. Many entrepreneurs I interviewed highly recommend holding regular family meetings, a fixed time to discuss how everyone is doing and what each family member can do to improve life in the home. This again can help keep everyone in touch even when everyone in the family is busy. Ask the family to visit your universe too. Even if your spouse doesn't routinely work in the company, she can run a booth at a trade show, sit in on board meetings, or go along on a sales call, for example. This applies to children as well. Take them out of school a day a year and have them spend a day with you at work, or bring them on a business trip if that's appropriate. Create opportunities for your family to learn more about what you do. Don't delay key life goals. I end the book with a chapter about this because I think it's so important. When one member of a family owns a business, there never seems to be a right time to do anything. When you're an entrepreneur, life goals can be just like exercise. If you wait for the right time to do them, you never will. There's no right time because often there's no time at all, and usually no money either for getting married, having kids, buying a house, saving for retirement, taking vacation, even getting a dog. Planning becomes difficult when income, if it exists at all, is insecure, and savings are often unsubstantial. So an entrepreneurial life can become all about postponing. When we break even, when we get that contract, when we hire that salesperson, yes, that's when our lives can move ahead. Only that day doesn't come because the business never grows up. It may reach a point no longer needs constant coddling, but a company is an evolving organism that constantly challenges its founder, sucking up attention and resources at every stage. If you allow a business, even a successful one, to dictate your life, you will always find reasons to delay making the big personal investments. The inescapable fact is that while you are building and sometimes rebuilding a business, you are also composing a life. And finally, take time for yourself. In order to successfully bear the load that you do, you need to take care of yourself. This means different things to each of us. It might be time for exercise. That's certainly what my husband Gary turns to. It might be a time for meditation or seeing or creating art or learning a new craft. But you need to keep feeding yourself well. I mean this literally too. Eating junk is you sending yourself a message that your well-being doesn't matter. that you aren't worth the time it takes to feed yourself well. The reality is caring for your business, your family, and yourself all require perseverance and intense commitment. Succeeding at all of it can sometimes seem impossible, but it's really not. The key, I think, is in how you define success. If your goal is so-called work-life balance, I'd like to refer you to the dictionary definition of balance, a state of equilibrium or equipoise. If I could see you all, I'd ask how many of you feel like you're in a state of equilibrium. When I do this before groups of entrepreneurs, virtually no one raises their hand. The concept of balance exists only to torture us, I think, and make us feel like failures, because no one really achieves it, or if they do, it's for a microsecond until a child gets sick or an account doesn't pay. You wouldn't set an unachievable goal for your business. Why would you do it for your life? Consider that you really need or probably even want balance per se. What you want is a satisfying life. You derive satisfaction in different ways at different times. Sometimes it's by putting in those 80-hour weeks, and sometimes by sitting on the floor with your 2-year-old reading The Little Engine That Could, or lying on the beach with your spouse, or playing tennis, or doing absolutely nothing. Times of intense work and times of complete detachment from work are both part of a satisfying life. Sometimes it may feel that all these non-work activities come at the expense of business development. But we all know that no success in business can compensate for a personal life that's in tatters. A satisfying life, though, is not going to happen by accident. You need a strategy. The fact is that as passionate and energetic people, you are capable of harnessing your entrepreneurial talents to craft a satisfying personal life as well. Because what does it really mean to be entrepreneurial? It's about a certain spirit, a can-do approach, a never-say-die attitude. It's about having a vision for your life, what you want it to look like, and then figuring out how to make that happen. The entrepreneurial spirit never says, I can't do that, it's impossible. Instead, that spirit prompts you to tell yourself, I'm going to do this, I'm going to figure out how to get it done. It's the spirit that lets you live an extraordinary life, a life in which, in fact, you can have it all. I read an article by Delia Ephron, who's Nora Ephron's sister, in which she described having it all as the magical time when what you want and what you have match up. It's those moments in life when you suspend judgment and attain that elusive thing called peace of mind. So whether you're burning the midnight oil at work or kicking around a soccer ball with your daughter, try to be fully engaged with whatever it is you're doing. Try on the feeling that you're exactly where you want to be. Remember that at any given point, you will likely be shortchanging someone or something. Your spouse, your children, your work, yourself. Take a deep breath and accept that fact. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just remember that you're giving your spouse and kids a ringside seat to what it means and just how rewarding it can be to live an engaged and passionate life. So thank you all for listening, and I think this is a good time for me to take some questions. Before I do, I just want to remind listeners that I am looking for entrepreneurs and spouses to interview for my column on Inc.com, which is appearing. I just started in the online version doing a blog. I had been in the print magazine for 5 years. So this column is going to appear every other week, again under the name of Balancing Acts. So thank you all for listening.
Meg, thank you very much. An audience, as Meg mentioned, we are taking questions at this time until probably for about the next 20 minutes. So Meg, one of the first things I want to mention here is some people may have lost part of the audio about 20 minutes in when you were talking about children. And you may have talked about this, but someone's asking, how much information do you recommend sharing about your company's up and downs? How much of that should we share with our children? And what type of sacrifices, in your experience, have your children given with the business?
This is really an excellent question, and of course a sensitive and difficult topic, and I think that it depends on so many factors. There's no one answer. For example, during our early years, we were fortunate in the sense that our children were really young. They were too young to understand anything. As long as they had their room, their toys, their friends, they were blissfully oblivious to the stresses that Gary and I were under. Had they been older, I'm not really sure what we would have said to them, and I think that reasonable people can disagree on this topic. I've actually interviewed spouses who disagree with each other about how much to share. In one case, this woman had grown up. They were in business together, the husband and the wife, and she had grown up in an entrepreneurial household where the income was up and down, and they were she felt the insecurity, and she did not want to raise her kids that way. Her husband, on the other hand, felt that the kids ought to know why they couldn't go to Disney this year or get that special gadget they wanted to get because mom and dad were having a tough time in business. So I think it really depends on the age of the children, on what's going on what the parents feel comfortable doing. I think it's important that parents agree, talk about this together and agree on an approach to their children. You mentioned sacrifices. Could you elaborate on that question?
Well, you kind of mentioned it like with Disney. So they wanted to go to Disney, but we have to make a sacrifice that that's just something that we're not able to do, or maybe you have children in dance class, and those things that you may have to give up in order to deal with those ups and downs of the businesses.
Yeah, and I've certainly interviewed many entrepreneurs who've had to do that, who've had to, in one case, one female entrepreneur I interviewed had been feeling such guilt about not being with her children very much, not picking her kids up after school, and the kids kind of rubbed it in, because that's the other thing is the children at a certain age, they see your vulnerabilities. I mean, they're all smart, and sometimes they take any opportunity to sort of rub it in, well, the other moms pick up their kids after school, why can't you, kind of thing. And I think parents should resist absorbing that guilt, because they should keep in mind that what they're doing is really for the long-term best interest of the family, or at least that's what they're attempting to do. So certainly, like in one case, this one woman I interviewed, she decided to put less time into her business and asked her partner to take on more, but she took a kind of lower salary from the business as a result. And she sat down with the kids and said, well, Disney was in her case as well. She said, we're not going to Disney this year, but you get me. And the kids, they all said, we'd prefer to have you than that trip to Disney. So, this is not easy stuff when it comes to children. There are many, many variables, but again, these are personal decisions, but again, I think it's important for spouses to make sure they're on the same page.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Another question that we have, how do you distribute responsibilities at home to achieve a reasonable balance with your roles in the company?
Is this assuming that spouses work together?
I would assume yes.
Yeah.
Because you've got your roles in the company, but then how do you distribute your additional roles that you have at home, the responsibilities and such, between you, your husband, and maybe even your children and other members living in your household?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this, certainly the statistics are that, say, in situations where both spouses work, forgetting about the fact that they work in a company together, but when both spouses work, the woman ends up assuming a really outsized share of maintaining the home, getting the kids to their dentist appointments, waiting for the plumber, etc. And I think that this is stuff, whether the couple is working together or not, if both spouses are working, this is the kind of thing that really needs to be discussed, and make sure that there's some sort of equity there, and that one person is not unduly burdened because of just gender roles that we're all accustomed to. And in terms of the kids, I think that this is where family meetings can be really useful. Gary and I, we tried the family meeting thing. We weren't so disciplined about it, but when we did it, it was great. Mm-hmm. Because we all went around and said, well, how we can help make the house work better, things that we can do better or do more of, and it would get the kids reflecting too on ways that they could help. So I do recommend those. That is never a bad idea, as long as you set ground rules for how to run the family meeting. The kids don't feel like they can start, it is all kept positive.
Very good. Another question here. Oftentimes parents feel guilty and try to compensate for their working all the time with money. How do you teach balance and work ethic to your children?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that balance and work ethic are, two different questions. In terms of the balance piece, I think it's very important to be fully present when you are with your children. I think this is the big issue that happens, that mom sits in the room with her teenage son and she's on her smartphone and he's playing a video game and she's thinking that we're spending time together,
Right.
But that's really not the case. So I think with what's most important with the kids is being present with them when you are with them. In terms of work ethic, our kids, even when we started to make a lot of money in the business and we were doing well and I could pay all my visa bills without sweating it, my kids we always expected them to work, and they did. They worked after school, they became soccer referees, they did this, they did that, they worked during the summers. That was just, not that we didn't give them gifts and nice vacations, but we wanted them to understand that they had to think of themselves as productive people. And I think that's just something that, that you communicate verbally and in your expectations of the kids. And also you communicate it by just what you do, that both parents are working hard and the kids see that, they observe that, and they learn from that.
Right. Another question too, again, talking about the children and the family. Somebody is asking what activities meant the most to your family, and what do they talk about now, from those activities in a positive way. And I know that you've talked about the family vacations and even, family meetings. I'm sure that looking back, that could be, I don't know, what are those activities that your children talk about in a positive way now when they reflect back when they were younger?
You mean family activities?
Yes.
I assume you mean family activities. I would say number one are vacations. Mm-hmm. It's funny, you can go away a total of 2 weeks a year or something, but the amount of space it takes up in their brain in terms of their memories is enormous.
Right.
And again, that's why I put so much emphasis on it. Because also, it's not just away and having fun, it's that they have your complete attention for the most part. Though I have to say a little asterisk there, for many, many years, Gary really couldn't get away completely. And that was an issue on our vacations. And finally, we worked it out. And this worked out pretty well. It wasn't ideal. Again, none of this is really ideal, but you do the best you can. What we worked out was that he agreed that he would limit his work on vacations to the mornings, and that the afternoons and evenings would be just straight family time. And that took so much of the tension out because when, he'd be on the phone or whatever or on his laptop during the morning, but I didn't feel stressed out, about it. The kids didn't, because we knew that come lunchtime we'd all be together. So anyway, back to, I think vacations are huge. I think that my husband coached all my children in soccer, and I think they really loved that, but there was a kind of obligatory aspect to that that, you know, I don't know that they look back on that in a mixed way, because he was, you know, for him it was a way to really be with the kids in a scheduled, regular way. But, you know, when you're a coach, you're not really spending time with them personally.
Right.
And, you know, your coaches have to lay down the law sometime and stuff. So I don't think in the end, I think, you know, in the end, when they think of spending time with him or with me, it was really those unscheduled things. It was just kind of sitting around with them, you know, yakking, time in the car, again, watching a stupid movie, you know, laughing at silly things. It's that unscheduled stuff that I think is really important.
Thank you very much. And I know there's a lot of great information here, and you've given us many pieces of advice, but what would be your top 2 pieces of advice that you would like to share?
You know, I think that empathy goes around. Such different roles that I think it would have been better in, you know, looking back, if we had made more of an effort to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. I think that's, you know, that's really key. And the other thing is that, and this just has to do with modern challenges of technology, is we have to be, entrepreneurs especially, have to be really hyper aware of not being wedded to technology, of not glancing at their smartphone when their spouse is talking to them or their child is talking to them. This is just so common. And we don't really have a lot of cultural rules yet established around these things because it's all moving so quickly. But make sure that when you are, as the entrepreneur, that when you're with your spouse or your kids, that they feel they have 100% of your attention. Because, you know, they deserve it, and because when they don't have it, you're sending them a kind of meta message, which is, you know, my work stuff is more important, you know, that, you know, yes, I want to hear you, but I don't want to sacrifice what may be coming in on email right now. And I think that's a very toxic message. So yeah, you know, be fully present with them.
Okay, thank you very much. That actually takes through the rest of our questions that we have. Meg, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Just that, again, I would encourage, you'll see on your screen how to reach me. You can, actually, I don't have my email is, well, meg@meghirshberg.com. I'd encourage anyone to email me with questions, or if you think that you have a story in terms of the issues that I've discussed today that you would like to share with me for the column, I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, great. Audience too, we invite you to learn more from Meg and other entrepreneurs in the newest Kauffman Founder School series on surviving the entrepreneurial life. A link to that site, which is at www.entrepreneurship.org. We'll have a link to that series out on our authors page at www.fasttrac.org/authors. So a recording of this webinar, a link to the Founder School series, also a link on how to purchase Meg's book if you're interested, and her website URL will be available within the next few days on our landing page. We'll also be following up with an email distribution to the folks who received the last set, the remainder of this author series. So thank you again for joining us. Our next author series is Wednesday, March 12th. We will welcome Dory Clark, who will discuss her book, Reinventing You, Define Your Brand, Imagine Your Future. Thank you very much.